Let's be clear, sea level rise is a very serious concern for Miami-Dade County and all of South Florida. It's not a theory, it's a fact. We live it every day, and that's why my administration, along with our municipal partners, have made adapting to it a priority. We will meet these and other challenges posed by sea level rise and climate change.
Welcome back to this special edition of Facing South Florida, where we examine the politics of climate change. That soundbite you just heard was Carlos Jimenez, back when he was the mayor of Miami-Dade County, delivering his 2017 State of the County address. Today, he is a Republican member of Congress representing South Dade and the Florida Keys. Back when he was mayor, he voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016, went to a U.S.-China climate summit for mayors from both countries, and accepted an invitation to attend a climate change summit at the White House with Barack Obama. Today, he is an avid Trump supporter who aggressively defends the former president, even voting to not certify the results of the 2020 election in the hours after the insurrection at the Capitol. What changed, especially on the issue of climate change? That's not clear. But in March, for instance, he issued a press release touting that he voted for a bill that would cut $574 million from what he described as wasteful climate change programs. We invited Jimenez to come on so we could ask him about his apparent shift, but he ignored our request for an interview. And his office did not respond to questions about his votes against climate change legislation. The League of Conservation Voters issues a scorecard based on how often members of Congress vote in favor of environmental legislation. Jimenez has a score of just 9%. But he is certainly not alone. A review of the rest of the South Florida delegation shows the stark divide between Democrats and Republicans. Republicans will argue their voting record doesn't necessarily reflect their views on the environment. They may agree with certain parts of a bill, for instance, but will ultimately vote against it because Democrats added something to the legislation they oppose. They also prefer to talk only about ways to mitigate damage from global warming, as opposed to trying to solve the root causes. In 2022, Hurricane Ian devastated the state. The storm, which grew in size and fury because of the higher than normal temperatures of the waters off the coast, caused billions of dollars in damage. Republicans demanded federal aid. In the wake of the storm, the New York Times noted that while Mario Diaz-Balart, for instance, had secured billions for resiliency projects, none of the top Republicans in the state have supported legislation to curb the greenhouse gas emissions causing climate change. Diaz-Balart did not respond to a request for comment. In a statement to CBS News Miami, Congresswoman Salazar did not address questions about her specific votes on pieces of legislation, but her office did write, "Salazar is a leading environmental advocate in Congress, having passed legislation to protect the Everglades, passed legislation to benefit marine habitats, is the GOP leader on national climate resilience efforts, and recently proposed a first-of-its-kind voluntary sustainable clothing label to track emissions in the textile industry. Just this year, she is working to secure millions in environmental community funding projects for Miami, including for coral reef restoration, reducing diesel emissions at ports, and for coastal resilience." Advocates argue it's not just the cost to taxpayers of bailouts after hurricanes we should be concerned about, but rather the everyday cost of rising insurance rates in Florida, as well as higher utility bills.
Well, there's always been this perception that climate change is something that's down the road. Now, of course, people are starting to see it more and more with the extreme weather, the disasters, the flooding, the heat, and so forth. So it's starting to be better understood. Energy efficiency is the cleanest, cheapest, fastest way to meet our energy need. But if you sell fossil fuel products, if you own gas pipelines or a utility company, inherently you don't want to sell less energy, right? In Florida, which is a regulated market, you know, the utilities make money by selling more electricity. They don't want to help you save less energy. And our friends at the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy rank the states in terms of energy efficiency, and Florida's at the back of the pack. Our biggest utility in the state is 52 out of 53 in offering energy efficiency programs, because they don't want to, number one, help people use less energy, but if they avoid, if they capture all the cost-effective efficiency, then that avoids the need to build a new power plant. But if you make money building power plants and transmission lines and pipelines, then that's not the outcome that you were looking for. But that is harming our pocketbooks, it's harming our health, and it's warming this planet to a degree that we're seeing sea levels rise.
Last year, Governor Ron DeSantis, who during his run for president railed against the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure bill, vetoed in the state budget tens of millions of dollars in federal money that came from those bills to help Floridians make their homes more energy efficient. Facing a backlash, he reversed course and has now agreed to accept $346 million from those very bills he and every other Republican in Florida decried as wasteful. Nevertheless, rarely have Republicans paid a price for their positions on climate change, because while voters may say it is important, they don't base their vote on it. One group is working to change that.
The Environmental Voter Project is a nonpartisan nonprofit that is laser focused on just one thing, and that is finding people who care deeply about climate and the environment who don't vote, and then turning them into better voters. We work with thousands of volunteers around the country, and we really are just laser focused on behavior change, by which I mean, Jim, we aren't trying to get people to care more about climate change. That's important work, but oh my gosh, is it hard. And we want to bypass the hard, messy stuff of politics, which is trying to change people's opinions, and instead just go right to finding the people who are already with us, finding the people who already care deeply about climate, yet aren't voting, and we turn them into new voters and eventually consistent voters.
The trick there is, it seems from all the polling I've seen, that voters, existing voters, ones who do vote, do say the environment is important. The issue for them is it just isn't the most important issue, so therefore it doesn't really drive their voting patterns. And so therefore, even though polls may show that a politician is in a district in which 60, 70% or more believe the environment and climate change is important, since they don't rank it their number one issue, the politicians then don't vote as if it's the most important issue to those voters. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, so first of all, you're exactly right at diagnosing the problem, Jim. There's a huge difference between voter preferences and voter priorities. And, politicians have limited time and limited money and a limited ability to communicate with voters. And so, although it's an important first step that large majorities of Americans and large majorities of Floridians care about addressing the climate crisis, you're right that it's not enough. Because when it's not a top priority for them when they go into the voting booth on election day, that means that politicians can get away without leading on climate. And so you ask what we do about that. Well, that's why we at the Environmental Voter Project aren't just mobilizing people who care about climate change. Those people are nice, but that's not enough to actually force politicians to lead on climate. So instead, we focus just on mobilizing people who literally list climate or other environmental issues as their number one priority over all other issues. If we can get those people to become consistent voters, politicians will follow, simply because politicians really like winning elections.
Stinnett says his group has identified 642,000 registered climate voters in Florida who, as of today, are unlikely to show up on Election Day.
And when we look at South Florida in particular, we've identified over 20,000 of these low-propensity climate voters in Miami-Dade County and over 72,000 in Broward County. So these low-propensity climate voters could really, really make a difference on Election Day if they show up. And we're trying to make sure that happens. When we look at the solutions to the climate crisis, we already have dozens of them. We know what policies could be enacted to start addressing the climate crisis. We know what technologies need to be adopted more quickly. We know how utilities and energy consumption need to change. We have all these answers, but usually what is standing in their way is a lack of political will for politicians to enact those solutions. Because many politicians think, you know what, it's easier for me to win elections by ignoring the climate crisis. And let's be honest, Jim, oftentimes they are right. And that lack of political will to lead on climate is our biggest problem in the climate movement. And so what we're doing at the Environmental Voter Project is so crucially important simply because it builds demand in the electorate for climate leadership. Because at the end of the day, politicians aren't going to decide to lead on climate out of the goodness of their hearts. They're going to do it when eventually it becomes key to them winning elections. And ultimately, at the Environmental Voter Project, our theory of change relies on one thing and one thing only, and that is nothing motivates a politician more than the prospect of winning or losing an election. So they always go where the votes are, and it's incumbent upon us to make sure as many of those voters have climate on top of their minds.
We'll have more on this later in the week. We'll be right back after the break.